So I came across this video by Professor Jiang. Islam was the first intellectual revolution. It's respectful, it's interesting, but a few parts definitely need clarification. Now, I haven't seen all of his work, so I don't know much about him personally, but in this lecture, he actually tries to engage with Islam in a thoughtful and intelligent way, and I respect that. Still, there are a few things that don't quite line up with what Islam actually teaches. And since he's speaking from an outsider's perspective, it's only fair that we look at those points from within the Islamic worldview, the way Muslims understand it through the Quran and authentic hadith. I'm not going to go through every single thing he said, just some key points that need correction or a bit of context. Before jumping into the clips, I just want to say this real quick, because it will make the rest of what I say make sense. When we talk about Islam, we are not talking about a religion that humans built or reinterpreted over time. Islam is a complete system of life revealed by God that gives clear guidance for everything. How we live, how we understand the world, how we deal with others, how we define justice and purpose. So when someone studies Islam from the outside, especially through an academic or historical lens, they usually treat it like one of many beliefs that came, changed, and evolved throughout history. But that's not what Islam is. Islam isn't shaped by history, it shapes history. It's revelation, timeless and preserved, built on truth that doesn't change with culture or century. And that's important to understand, because if you don't start from that point, you'll end up misreading almost everything that comes after. All right, let's go through a few of the things he said.
Influence the world. That's the power of paganism. But Islam is doing the same thing by making God concrete. Okay? You can feel God. God is everywhere. He knows everything. But what Islam is also doing is...
So he says you can feel God. God is everywhere. He knows everything. I'm not exactly sure what his thought process here is, whether he means God is everywhere literally, or he's talking about God's knowledge being everywhere. Either way, I want to clear this up because it's an important point in how Islam understands who Allah is, who God is. In Islam, God is not physically present everywhere. He is above his creation, above his throne, completely distinct from everything he created. Allah knows, God knows what's in our hearts, what we do, what we hide. Nothing escapes him. But he's not mixed with his creation or inside his creation. That distinction is what kept Islamic understanding pure. It keeps the creator and the creation separate. Let's move on to the next part.
Very, very clear. Okay? So in other words, Islam is a major intellectual revolution in human history. And we have forgotten this because Islam, the idea, has embedded itself into modernity itself. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So what I will show you over the course of this semester is that Islam really is the proto-modernity.
So here the professor says Islam has embedded itself into modernity and that Islam is the proto-modernity. I understand what he's trying to make a positive point, that Islam played a major role in shaping the intellectual world that came after. But the way it's phrased really matters, because depending upon what he means, it can point to two completely different ideas. If he's saying that Islam was an early version of modernity, like Islam started something that Europe later perfected, then that's not correct at all, because Islam isn't some first draft of human progress. It's not version one of a bigger idea. Islam is a revelation, the complete and final system from God, perfect in every sense, not waiting for any human upgrade. Modernity, on the other hand, is built on the idea that humans define truth and morality on their own terms. Islam uses reason, yes, but it puts reason under revelation, not above it. So when someone says Islam embedded itself into modernity, it kind of flips the order. Islam didn't embed itself into modernity. Modernity borrowed fragments of Islam. Europe's progress didn't appear out of thin air. It came after centuries of learning from the Muslim world, from Andalusia, from Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo, where Muslim scholars were advancing astronomy, mathematics, optics, medicine, architecture. All of that came out of a Quran-guided civilization that treated the pursuit of knowledge as an act of worship. God says in the Quran, chapter 41, verse 53, we will show them our signs in the universe and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that this Quran is the truth. Is it not enough that your Lord is a witness over all things? That verse perfectly captures how Islam sees knowledge. It's not just discovery for curiosity's sake, it's reflection that leads you back to God. So, yes, if the professor means that Europe was influenced by Islamic civilization, that's accurate. But Islam itself was never a phase in human progress. It wasn't a prototype that needed improvement. People might take fragments from Islam, its discipline, its structure, its pursuit of knowledge, and build new systems from them. But those systems are man made. Islam is divine from God. So, to be fair, I'm not exactly sure what the professor meant, but in either case, it's important to be precise. Islam isn't just the prototype of modernity, it's the standard of truth that reveals where modernity went wrong.
Self past everyone. Okay? The problem, though, is it's too simple and clear.
Okay, so the first thing he calls a weakness is that Islam is too simple and clear. I think what he's trying to say is that because Islam's message is so direct, it leaves less room for reinterpretation, which, in his view, limits creativity or innovation. But if you think about it, if a system is from the Creator, meant for every single human being, from the most educated scholar to the simplest farmer, then clarity isn't a weakness, it's a mercy. The Quran's clarity isn't a flaw, it's the proof that it was meant for all people across all times. You don't need an institution or priesthood to interpret your relationship with God. You just need sincerity, intellect, and submission. That accessibility is what gave Islam the power to unite nations under one truth, not confuse them with endless philosophical debate. Now, the professor connects that simplicity to lack of innovation. And that's where it really goes off track. Islam draws a clear boundary between what's divine, which can't be altered, and what's worldly, where human creativity and progress are not just allowed, they are encouraged. That's why the early Muslims led the world in science, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, because their pursuit of knowledge was rooted in worship. The rules of Allah gave direction to their creativity. They weren't guessing what was right. They were discovering the signs of Allah within His creation. So instead of Islam limiting innovation, its clarity actually protected innovation from corruption. When the moral foundation stays fixed, exploration becomes safe, that's balanced, not restriction.
Second problem then is it's inflexible. It can't be as innovative as
The second
Christianity.
point he makes is that Islam is inflexible. Again, that depends on what you mean by flexibility. If flexibility means constantly changing your moral principles to fit new trends, then no, Islam is inflexible in that sense. And that's actually the beauty of it. Because if truth keeps shifting every generation, then morality has no anchor. But if flexibility means being able to handle different contexts, cultures, and situations while keeping the same core, Islam is extremely flexible. Allah says in chapter 2, verse 173, but whoever is forced by necessity, neither desiring it nor transgressing its limits, then there is no sin upon him. Well, think about that. Even in the strictest laws, Allah, God, built in mercy and exception. If, for example, if someone is starving and the only food available is something prohibited, they can eat just enough to survive. That's not rigidity, that's divine wisdom. So Islam's strength is that it's morally fixed, but practically adaptable. It doesn't compromise its values, but it applies them with justice and compassion. And this balance is what made Islamic law, Sharia, timeless, because it's not frozen in culture or history. It speaks to human condition in every era.
Christianity and Judaism. The third problem is Islam purports to stand outside of history.
So when he says Islam stands out of history, I think he's trying to say that Islam sees itself as timeless, and he interprets that as a limitation. But the truth is, Islam being outside of history doesn't mean it's disconnected from it. It means it's above it. Islam didn't emerge out of historical struggle or human thought. It came from the one who created time itself. That's not a weakness. That's exactly why it remains relevant no matter the century. And yet Islam doesn't ignore history either. It engages with it, corrects it, and guides it. So if you look carefully, every so-called weakness he lists, simplicity, firmness, timelessness, is actually a sign of divine perfection. These qualities are what allowed Islam to build civilizations that balanced knowledge and morality, something that the modern world still struggles with today. Islam isn't outdated or rigid. It's preserved, consistent, and alive. What he calls inflexible is what we call unchanging truth.
So in the beginning, the very aspects, the very strengths of Islam will give rise to a tremendous period of creativity. But over time, you will have these innovations will become dogma, and they will ossify, and they will prevent further growth in society.
So he's saying that the very strength of Islam, its structure and clarity, eventually turned into dogma and stopped progress. But that's not what really happened. The decline of Muslim civilization wasn't because of Islam, it was because Muslims drifted from Islam. You can't blame the medicine for the patient refusing to take it. Islam gave a complete framework for knowledge, ethics, and leadership. The early Muslims, the ones who built the Golden Age, were deeply faithful and intellectually fearless. They saw studying the universe as worship, not rebellion. The problem came when knowledge got separated from the remembrance of Allah, remembrance of God. That's when civilization loses its direction, when purpose turns into pride. And then he says, Europe improved on the Muslims by destroying dogma. Sure, they built institutions and universities, but the foundation they used was borrowed from the Muslim world, just stripped of revelation. And when you remove God from knowledge, you get progress without peace, technology without meaning. So he's half right about the decline, but completely wrong about the cause. Islam didn't stop progress, losing Islam did.
The first is it's contradictory. When you read the Bible, it's always contradicting itself. Create a lot of issues. Okay, the first issue is it's a really confusing story. Why would God come down to earth, manifest himself as a human, and then sacrifice himself? That's really, really confusing. Like, I know there's a lot of really good explanations as to why this is the case. Still, if you're just a normal person, you can't understand the story. It makes no sense to you, okay? Second is that it's counterintuitive. A lot of the ideas in Christianity, it is counterintuitive. The Holy Trinity must be the strangest idea in religion, where God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus are separate but equal. It makes no intuitive sense to anyone of Christianity. And so Islam now makes sense because it's trying to remedy and rectify these failings of Christianity, okay? The first is that it takes the Jewish tradition and Christian tradition and makes it part of itself, okay? So it is really the continuation and the perfection of the Jewish Christian tradition. You now know how to behave in the world. There's a clarity of purpose and action.
He's right about one thing. Islam brought clarity where people had confusion, but that clarity isn't a limitation. Islam didn't try to fix anything. It's the same divine message restored in its final form. God says in chapter 5, verse 3, "This day I have perfected for you your way of life, completed my favor upon you, and chosen Islam as your deen." The Quran isn't a human correction of old ideas. It's the perfection of revelation. And yes, it's clear because truth is supposed to be clear. Confusion is a human problem. Clarity is a divine mercy.
You know that as long as you do those 5 things, those 5 pillars of Islam, your life will be good. God is in you. And that gives you strength and purpose and power. Okay?
This part I fully agree with. The 5 pillars aren't rituals. They are the backbone of a complete worldview. They shape how a Muslim lives and thinks, grounding every action in purpose, discipline, and connection to God. So yes, he made some fair observations, but he's still looking at Islam from the outside as if it's one more religion in the lineup. In reality, Islam is the source, the final revelation that others drifted away from. It doesn't evolve from earlier faiths. It restores them in truth and in full.
Okay? What I'm arguing is that a culture needs to have an attitude, a perspective, a worldview, an orientation. For the Byzantines and the Europeans, they chose Plato. But the Muslims chose Aristotle. The Muslim world had a decidedly Aristotelian perspective, whereas the European world had a Platonic.
So here the professor argues that Islam chose Aristotle, that Muslims entered their golden age because they followed his ideas about observation and motion. I get why he's trying to say that Muslims valued evidence and reasoning, that this framing flips reality. Islam didn't choose Aristotle. Islam already commanded observation long before Aristotle's work were ever translated. God says in the Quran in chapter 3, verse 190, "Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and day are signs for those of understanding, who remember God and reflect on creation." That's the foundation of true empiricism, reflection driven by revelation. Aristotle observed the world to seek explanation. Islam commands observation to recognize the Creator. So the golden age wasn't born out of philosophy. It was born out of La ilaha illallah. There's no God worthy worship except Allah. That worldview that everything has meaning because it points back to God is what produced both certainty and science. Islam didn't borrow its curiosity from the Greeks. It revealed the purpose behind it.
That what will happen is the Europeans will learn from the Muslims. They'll copy the Muslims, right? They'll bring back Aristotle, they'll bring back science, and they'll bring back intuition, all right? And they will do so through three major events. The first is the Renaissance.
This part I actually agree with. Europe did take a lot from the Muslim world, from our sciences, our methods of reasoning, our libraries, our scholars. That's true. But what's often left out is what they left behind. Revelation. Muslims sought knowledge to know God. Europe took that same method but disconnected it from the Creator. And when you remove revelation from knowledge, you end up with technology but no guidance, progress but no peace. And that's why the same modernity that built machines also built moral confusion, loneliness, and wars driven by greed. So, yes, they borrowed from Islam, but they also lost what made that knowledge sacred. Let's wrap this up. History keeps changing its story, theories rise, systems fall, but the truth stays where it's always been. Islam didn't evolve into modernity, it defined what real progress means. Truth wasn't meant to evolve, it was meant to be followed. I'll see you in the next one, inshallah. آخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.
وأقول قال الله جل جلاله والمصطفى الهادي ولا أتأول